Hi, this is a short video about deponent verbs. Now, just before we start, it's worth talking about the voice of a verb. Every verb has a voice, either active or passive. Now, an active verb, the subject of that verb does, so the noun that's in the nominative does the action of the verb, whereas the subject of a passive verb has the action done to them. And that's going to be something that's important to remember as we have a look. So we've said that the passive is a voice whereby the subject of the verb, rather than doing the action of the verb, has the action done to it. So if we have a look here, this is an example of an active verb, punie bat. So our subject, the noun that's in the nominative, so here it's dominative, so the master, he is doing the action. So the master was punishing the object, which is so the master was punishing the slave. Now, a second example. So here we can see that the verb has changed. It's no longer punie bat, but a passive ending, punie barter. So this one, the subject of the sentence, the noun, again in the nominative, but this time it's Servus, the slave. He is having the action done to him. So the slave was being punished by the master. So we can see here that each time, the meaning of the sentence is essentially the same, but the verbs are slightly different in that they have a different voice. Now that takes us in very well to deponent verbs, because deponent verbs are a special category of verb, that they are passive in form, so they are always going to look passive. However, they are active in meaning. We're going to translate them as though they are active. So if we have a look at an example, so seque barter is an example of a deponent verb. It looks very much as though it's passive. That ter ending looks as though it's passive. However, because it's a deponent verb, we're actually going to translate it as active. So the woman here, who is our nominative, she is in fact going to be doing the action of the verb. The subject of a deponent verb always does the action of the verb. So the woman was following, active, she is doing the following, was following the freedman. So note that the subjects of deponent verbs, as we just said, so the femina in the last example, because deponent verbs are translated as active, they are in fact doing the action of the verb, even though they look passive. So in passages, unfortunately, there's no distinguishing feature. There's no way to identify whether a verb that looks passive, whether it is in fact just a normal verb in the passive, or if it's deponent verbs. And the best, simply, deponent verbs need to be treated as special bits of vocab that have to be learned. So for example, there is a list of common deponent verbs. This is by no means exhaustive, but egredior, meaning I go out, hortor, meaning I encourage, ingredior, I enter, locor, I speak, precor, I pray, proficiscor, I set out, progredior, I advance, sequor, I follow. So these are a list of some of the more common deponent verbs that you might come across. Now, note, because these verbs look passive, but we're going to translate them as though they are active, there is in fact no passive form of any of these verbs. So if you want to say, I am being followed, it is not possible to say that in Latin using the verb sequor. You've got to use a different verb because there isn't a passive meaning of deponent verbs. Now, on vocab lists, so different from if you spot a deponent verb in a passage, but on vocab lists, deponent verbs can be recognized by their slightly different principal parts because, most importantly, we'll notice that they only have three. So hortor only has three principal parts, hortor, hortari, hortatus sum, which is very different from a normal verb, which we know has four principal parts. However, in some ways they are very similar because in the way that paro, meaning I prepare, it's the present tense, hortor too means I encourage. So these are essentially equivalents. And we know that our second principal part is essentially the infinitive. So parare means to prepare. So hortari is the infinitive of hortor, to encourage. Parawi, we know, is the perfect active, crucially. So parawi means I prepared. Hortatus sum also means I prepared. Now, the reason why there's no fourth principal part for a deponent verb is because the fourth principal part is actually only ever used to form something in the passive. Paratum, we know, is essentially the PPP, the perfect passive participle. Now, because there's no passive form of a deponent verb, it doesn't need a fourth principal part. It doesn't need the supine. So, just to sum up quickly, okay, the most important thing is to remember that deponent verbs look as though they are passive, but we're always going to translate them as active. And unfortunately, okay, there is no shortcut. We simply need to learn vocab. We need to learn which verbs are deponent verbs and which verbs just are appearing in the passive.